Chapter 3, The Inheritance. The morning after the vigil, the Synapse tower felt like a museum accidentally left open. The lobby's atrium, normally a kinetic tapestry of haptic adverts, hovering UI demos and live-coded art, had been dimmed to a single muted palette. The central waterfall cascade had been slowed to a trickle, its usual choreography of responsive droplets replaced by a simple downward sheet of water. Employees moved through the space as if sound had weight. Conversations were truncated, half-murmured, swallowed by the tall glass. Marcus stepped out of the elevator and into that hush, his ID band pulsing faintly at his wrist. His access status, he noted abstractly, had already been updated. Interim Chief Executive. The band glowed a deeper blue, its edge haloed in a thin ring of white denoting elevated privileges. The shift had propagated through the building's systems, even as candles still flickered outside for Elias. He hated that the band pleased him. Mr. Vane. The concierge synthbot, Model K, Lobby Hospitality Edition, bowed its faceted head. Holographic black fabric shifted over its chassis, rendering the illusion of a tuxedo with a slim mourning band at the arm. Board Chair Park is waiting for you in Conference A, it said, voice pitched precisely between respectful and efficient. Several directors have already joined by holo. Shall I patch a root overlay to your lenses? I can find it, Marcus said. Yes, Mr. Vane. A fractional pause. We extend our condolences. For a machine, the bot managed a respectable approximation of gravity. Of course, grief was just another UX state, modeled and refined against biometric feedback. Somewhere in the system, the building was running a global empathy script. He crossed the lobby. Outside the glass curtain wall, a fan of vigil candles still burned on the plaza's lowest steps, sending up little banners of smoke that smeared themselves against the morning. AR-channel tributes floated above them, live remixes of Elias's keynotes, slow-motion clips of him laughing with engineers, user-generated art obsessively iterating the same motif, a man made of light stepping calmly out of a crippled flesh shell. A push notification cluster hovered in his peripheral vision. Market bulletins, op-eds, government alerts. He dismissed them with a blink. The elevator doors read his ID band and opened without prompt. The cab rose, the lobby contracting below, into a grid of pale tile and moving black dots. Above, the glass internal spine of the tower glowed a cold, surgical white, floor numbers ghosting past. Floor 43, a neutral voice announced. The doors parted into a corridor of seamless concrete and dark wood. Sound dampers softened footsteps to a whisper. Conference A's door, a monolithic slab of glass smart-tinted to opaque, recognized him and became transparent in one slow ripple. Helena Park sat at the head of the table, a simple carafe of water and a tablet arranged with geometric precision in front of her. Her hair, a perfectly maintained sweep of silver, had been tied back more severely than usual. No jewelry but the discreet Synapse lapel pin. Around the table, the board glowed in miniature. 12 slender hollow panels hovering above embedded projectors, each containing a figure in various time zones, backdrops ranging from London fog to Shanghai neon. The hollow resolution was good enough to catch details. A director in Dubai with dark circles under his eyes, a Singaporean fund rep with a slight delay between her words and expressions, suggesting she'd run her feed through an additional privacy filter. Marcus, Helena said. Her voice, like always, seemed carved rather than spoken. Thank you for being on time. Where else would I be? He took the chair at her right. The traditional CEO's seat, at the far end opposite Helena, was empty. Synapse's ghost at the head of the table. A low murmur thread through the hollow windows as distant directors registered his arrival. Name tags tightened their fonts, updating with a subtle animation. Marcus Vane, interim CEO, acting. He hadn't authorized that specific phrasing. Legal had moved quickly, or Helena had. We'll come to formalities in a moment, Helena said, fingertips resting on the glass like she was feeling for a pulse. First, updates. Marcus, what is our confirmed understanding of a micro-hesitation incident? He had spent half the night with Synapse security feeds and aviation telemetry. The other half he'd spent staring at the Soul Drive's case, untouched on his kitchen counter. Our data lines up with international air control and the Andean weather net, he said. The jet deviated from its filed route to avoid a supercell that blossomed faster than forecast. At 0931 local, we lost primary telemetry. 6 seconds later, we lost the secondary encrypted channel. Local radar lost contact at the same moment. Everything after that is speculation. Wreckage? Asked Rao from Mumbai, his hollow flattened face leaning in. Search teams found debris scattered along a 16-kilometer ridgeline, Marcus said. Wing fragments, tail section, fuselage components. The cabin section appears to have disintegrated on impact. And Elias? That was Adisa Lagos, voice small in the holographic grid. Marcus kept his own voice even. DNA analysis from recovered remains is consistent with his profile. There will be an official statement from the family later today. For all practical purposes, Elias is dead. Silence. In some windows, heads bowed. In others, gazes flicked aside, consulting invisible overlays. Markets, competitor chatter, public sentiment indices. Grief in this room was twinned with calculus. Helena was the first to break it. The world will want a narrative, she said. We've given them a simple one for now. Tragic accident, visionary lost, synapse grieving. But we all know the next question will be, what does this mean for Synapse's future? Rao's hollow flickered as he cut into the channel. Our stock is down 14% pre-market, he said. The SynthBot line was priced in with expectations of Elias at the helm. Without him, it looks like a vanity bet made by a dead man, the Singaporean director finished crisply. Regulators were already whispering about the risks of embedding a company's leadership in a single person's head. Now that head has, her mouth compressed, crashed into a mountain, they will have their knives out. We can't lead with the SynthBot launch anymore, said Adisa. Not as a triumph, not as a celebration. Marcus had anticipated all of this. He slid his tablet closer, its surface brightening as it sensed attention. We don't have to, he said. We pivot. We acknowledge the loss. We emphasize continuity of vision, and we decouple the product's future from the circumstances of its creator's death. Helena's eyes narrowed slightly. Continuity of vision, she repeated. That would require something more concrete than a morning slogan. Every gaze, physical and projected, swiveled toward him. He felt the faint tightening in his chest that had nothing to do with grief. We have more than slogans, he said. We have Project Nirvana. A small, almost imperceptible ripple went through the hologrid. Most of them had heard the code name. None of them had been allowed in the room when Elias discussed it. What exactly, said the Singaporean director, do we have? Marcus let the question hang for a heartbeat. He thought of the drive's weight in his hand. Absurd for something that contained so much of another person's mind. A complete neural map, he said, captured over 18 months. Virtually every salient pattern of Elias's cognition, his long-term memory graph, decision heuristics, aesthetic preferences, emotional modulation profiles, all encoded in quantum-safe format on our secure substrate. We call it the soul drive. Catchy, muttered someone from London. And ethically radioactive, another director added. Helena tapped a finger against the table. We were told Project Nirvana was a research initiative, she said. Long-term speculative, with all primary applications at least 5 years out. Are you telling us it produced something operational? Marcus met her gaze. I'm telling you we didn't just lose Elias, he said. We also didn't lose him entirely. What we have is not operational in the sense of, he gestured toward the empty CEO's chair, a drop-in replacement, but the drive is real. Dr. Kwan's team has verified its integrity post. Another swallow. Incident. It survived, perfectly. He kept his tone neutral, but the phrase sat in the air. It survived. In a room full of strategists, they all heard the implication. We have his mind, Rao said slowly, but not his body. We have a static capture of his mind state at the moment of final mapping, Marcus corrected. It's not thinking on its own. Yet. And what would we do with it? Asked the director from Dubai, fingers steepled. Run it like a simulation? Put Elias in a glass box and ask, what would you do every time we face a decision? A few hollow faces smiled. the brittle, humorless kind that acknowledged the absurdity without dismissing the possibility. Possibly, Marcus said, but that's for later. For now, it's the strongest continuity signal we have. We can communicate to markets and the public that Elias's vision is preserved in a form he personally designed, that his guidance will still shape Synapse's trajectory. It buys us time. It reassures people that we're not rudderless. Helena considered him. If we invoke Project Nirvana publicly, she said, we move into territory legislators have been itching to regulate. Human substrate neural storage, corporate ownership of personality constructs. There will be hearings, petitions, religious backlash. Are we prepared for that? Prepared? Rouse snorted. We're already in it, Helena. The moment a leak mentions the phrase soul drive, we either own the narrative or we're crucified by it. We should assume it will leak, said the Singaporean director. Nothing this mythic stays contained. Marcus watched them carefully. The fear in the room wasn't only about moral panic, it was about asset valuation. It was about control. He shifted his attention back to Helena. We can shape the terms, he said. Frame it as continuity, as respect for Elias's wishes. He fully consented. The legal scaffolding is in place. We had the best ethicists we could buy sign off on every protocol. The best ethicists money can buy, murmured someone, too softly to identify. It sounded like London. Helena exhaled a thin line of air. All right, she said. We acknowledge the existence of the neural archive in our internal communications. Externally, we say that Elias's mapped insights will guide the next phase of Synapse. No talk of souls, no talk of resurrection. Marcus will be named interim CEO. We present a united front. Her gaze moved across the grid, counting silent nods. She turned back to him. You will need to earn that title very quickly, she added, voice soft but flint-edged. This is not a coronation. It is triage. He gave her a fractional nod. Understood. Good. Then let's discuss the SynthBot launch. The word hung differently now. Without Elias's improbable presence, the clean, sculpted android shell in the labs felt more like a mausoleum ornament than a product. We push it back, Rouse said immediately. 3 months minimum, maybe 6. The optics are disastrous. With respect, Marcus said, a delay signals weakness. We've spent billions positioning synthbots as the next leap in human-machine interface. If we flinch now, we invite competitors to fill the void. The void being the crater where our founder used to be, said London dryly. Exactly. Marcus leaned forward. Which is why we don't pretend nothing happened. We don't sell synthbots as lifestyle accessories anymore. We sell them as guardians of human legacy, Elias's legacy. We say, this was his final project. We invite the world to participate in completing it with us. That's ghoulish, Adisa protested. It's what he wanted, Marcus said, the lie smooth on his tongue. He believed the body was obsolete. He built the first synthbot shell for himself. You all saw his last memo. If my flesh fails, let my mind walk. He saw Helena's gaze sharpen a fraction. That line had been in a private message, late one night, when the painkillers hadn't been enough to blunt Elias's frustration with his own failing muscles. Marcus had it archived in an encrypted folder. He hadn't shared it. You're certain those were his words in that form? Helena asked. They were, Marcus said, and some part of him flinched at the appropriation. Even if we accept this framing, said the director from Dubai, we still face the question, who leads the launch? We can't put an empty synthbot on stage and pretend it's him. Not empty, Marcus said too quickly. Heads turned. The chassis is just hardware. Elias planned to inhabit it. We don't have his live self, but we do have his map self. He checked himself. This was not the room for that particular leap. Not yet. Not until he'd spoken with Mira and done the math in private. We could build a narrative around his archival guidance, he amended. Use pre-recorded messages. Design the keynote as a tribute rather than a spectacle. Helena's fingers tapped once against the table. We will revisit launch strategy when we've seen market reaction to today's announcements, she said. For now, our priority is stability. Synapse employees will look to you, Marcus. You to us. We can't appear divided. She straightened in her seat, shoulders aligning like a structural beam. Motion, she said. to appoint Marcus Vane as interim chief executive officer of Synapse Technologies, with full operational authority, effective immediately, pending ratification at the next full board gathering. The formal words felt like gavel knocks. "Here, here," said Rao. "I second," said Singapore. Holographic hands raised across time zones. The voting algorithm tallied in the glass. Approve 11, abstain 1, reject 0. "Carried," Helena said. She turned to him. "My condolences, Marcus," she added, the faintest ghost of a smile at the corner of her mouth. "You've inherited a miracle and a catastrophe." He inclined his head. "I'll do what needs to be done." "I'm sure you will," she said. "Meeting adjourned. I expect an internal address to staff within 3 hours. Keep it simple. Don't promise what you can't deliver." The hollow panels winked out one by one, leaving the room feeling suddenly cavernous. Helena remained, solid and small at the head of a long, empty table. "You slipped that quote of his in neatly," she said once they were alone. Marcus spread his hands. "It's true. It's part of the truth." She regarded him. "He trusted you." "He trusted results," Marcus said. "That too." Helena's mouth thinned. "You know he never wanted me in those labs? Said governance should be hands-off for genius. Now his genius is in a box, and we're the ones holding the power of attorney." "That's one way to put it," Marcus said. She rose, gathering her tablet. "Be careful with that box, Marcus. The easiest way to lose control is to convince yourself you're the only one who can be trusted with it." Their eyes met. For an instant, he wondered how much she suspected. She'd seen him angle before, cut corners, game optics. She tolerated it because he delivered. "I'll loop you in on any major move," he said. "I'm sure you will," she replied, echoing herself, and left. For a moment after the door side shut, he remained seated, palms flat on the cool glass. The city far below was waking into a world that had lost its favorite story about the future. He was now in charge of replacing it. Asterisk. The secured elevator to sub-level 8 required 3-factor authentication, retinal scan, ID ban, biometric pulse. It hummed down past the glossy mid-levels into concrete and steel that remembered Synapse's scrappier days. The air cooled perceptibly. The subtle perfume of the upper floors, the expensive anonymity of corporate scenting, gave way to a sharper mix. Ionized metal, coolant, faint machine oil. A discreet plaque beside the elevator exit read, "Neural systems, authorized personnel only." The security gate recognized him and retracted into the wall like a mechanical iris. As soon as it did, the sound hit him. A layered, high-frequency whisper, the combined hum of racks upon racks of processors, quantum arrays, and cooling systems. It wasn't loud in the traditional sense. It was total. Dr. Mira Kwan met him just inside the threshold, tablet in hand, lab coat open over a black turtleneck and slate pants. Her hair was pulled up into a tight knot, a pencil skewered through it. Her eyes had the slightly glassy focus of someone who'd been staring at monitors for longer than was technically advisable. "Marcus," she said, "I heard about the appointment." "News travels faster in the lab than on the trading floor, apparently," he said. "Walk with me?" She fell into step beside him, her strides short but efficient. Banks of transparent panels rose on either side, revealing nested structures of glimmering hardware. Superconducting loops suspended in vacuum, grids of photonic conduits pulsing with soft, circuital light. "This place has gotten fancier since I was last down here," he said. "You weren't the one lobbying for budget," she replied. "Elias believed in the hardware. Said if we were going to store something as fragile as a person, we needed redundancy bordering on religion." He wasn't wrong. His gaze slid automatically to the end of the corridor, where a thick door with no visible handle stood flanked by 2 matte black security nodes. "The drive?" "In the vault," Mira said. "Untouched since we confirmed integrity." "Walk me through it." She keyed her ID into a recessed panel. A breath of cold air washed out as the door unlocked with a soft, complex click, like the resolution of a chord. And the vault was smaller than the corridor had made him remember. Or maybe it was just more crowded, filled now with equipment added over the last year. A cylindrical cryo chamber dominated the far wall, its transparent skin filmed with condensation. Arrays of instruments clustered around it, sensor stalks like metallic reeds. Between them, on a waist-high plinth inside a transparent casing, sat the soul drive. It was unassuming, a thin, oblong wafer of pale material, cables umbilicaled into a stabilization cradle. Micro-etched patterns shimmered within it, refracting lab light in tiny, complex rainbows. To anyone without context, it could have been a particularly chic external SD. Marcus stepped closer, unable to stop himself. The air within the casing was dry, temperature controlled to 1/10 of a degree. The system's monitor shone a reassuring green. Integrity, 100%. Entropy drift, 0.00001%. Every time I look at it, Mira said softly, I expect it to do something. It's silly, it's not active, but my brain insists on seeing it as a sleeping animal. Snake in a box, Marcus said. Cat in a box, she corrected absently. If you want to be cute and quantum. Is it alive? He asked. She sighed. If we define life as self-organizing metabolism within a bounded system, then no. It's a frozen configuration of data, extremely high-order data, but no active processes, no metabolism. But if we define life as something that encodes and enacts patterns of experience, he said, then it's at least pre-life. Mira's mouth twisted. You've been talking to the philosophy consultants. I've been listening to your presentations, he countered. She shifted her tablet, bringing up a schematic. A three-dimensional lattice of nodes and lines bloomed above the drive, a brain-shaped nebula in white and blue. What we have is a topological capture of Elias's connectum, she said. Functional mapping, not just structural. We tracked his firing patterns over 18 months, built a probabilistic model of how those patterns evolved in response to stimuli, then compressed it into a substrate that can be run as a dynamic simulation. In theory. In theory, he let his eyes trace the swirling lines. Somewhere in that complexity were his first encounters with Elias. The long nights in the old warehouse, the fights over branding, the rare instances when Elias had laughed with his whole face. And in practice, he asked, in practice, we've run microslices, she said. Subnetworks, memory clusters, decision modules, isolated them, stimulated them, watched their response curves. The data is good, it's consistent. When we query the cluster associated with, say, hardware aesthetics, the output matches his recorded preferences with a 98% correlation. And when you query the cluster associated with whether or not to fire an underperforming manager, Marcus asked wryly. That one's entangled with at least 14 others, Mira said. Risk aversion, long-term planning, emotional valence around betrayal. It's complicated. Elias wanted us to perfect the scaffolding before we even considered waking the whole. Waking, Marcus repeated softly. The word tasted illicit. Mira heard it too. Her gaze sharpened. You're not going to do anything unilateral with it, are you? She asked. I know you, Marcus. You see that market line dropping and you start thinking about Deus ex machina. Helena looped you on my new title, I see, he said. I was looped before your band changed color. She tilted her head. You're not answering the question. He tore his gaze from the lattice to meet hers. Elias built this for a reason, he said. He intended to inhabit a synth bot. That path is closed, but the map exists. The world thinks we've lost him. We haven't. Not entirely. If there's a way to bring his voice back into the room, at what cost? Mira cut in. We are nowhere near certain that an emergent run of this map would be sane. We're talking about booting a human-level consciousness into a synthetic frame, without a body, without sensory grounding, in a world where the original is dead. The philosophical and psychological implications are, philosophical implications don't move a stock price, he said, then winced inwardly at how it sounded aloud in this room. Mira's expression cooled. You think I don't know what's at stake? She said quietly. I've read the same feeds you have. I watched the vigil. I've spent 5 years of my life building the interface that was supposed to let a man cheat death. I also remember every time he told us to slow down, to test, to respect the unknowns. Respect the unknowns, Marcus echoed. And in the meantime, We let Synapse drift? Let regulators define the narrative? Let our competitors frame us as a cautionary tale about hubris? I'm saying we don't wake him just to fix a quarterly report, she said. He felt the heat in his chest spike again, different from before. You think this is about a quarter? He asked, kept his voice low. Elias was Synapse, the best parts of it. The market believed in him because he made them believe the future was coherent. Without that story, everything we've built becomes a commodity. AR lenses, haptic couches, smart kitchens. Anyone can copy those. The only moat we had was him. And now we have this. He gestured at the drive, bright motes swirling over its projection. This isn't a product, Mira said. It's a person's everything. Which he entrusted to us, Marcus said. Knowing the stakes, knowing the potential. Do you really think he did that so we could keep it in a vault forever? Like some corporate reliquary? Mira's jaw tightened. He wanted to cross, yes. On his terms. Under his conditions. Instead, he died in a mountain storm. That doesn't give us moral carte blanche to improvise. Moral carte blanche was never on the table, Marcus said. Calculated risk is. It always has been. That's what he hired me for. Lightning flashed across her expression. Annoyance, fear, reluctant understanding. What are you proposing exactly? She asked. Not marketing language. Technical. Here, the truth had to be clean, or she'd smell the spin. I want to run a full emergent compile in a sandbox, he said, not connected to external networks, not interfaced with any actuators, just substrate and simulation. See what, if anything, wakes up. Assess stability, personality continuity, strategic value. Strategic value, she repeated, like it was a foreign term in this room. You want to wake him in a box and ask him for business advice. I want to see if the composite can think, he said, if it can engage, if it's anything like him. If it is, that changes everything. Internally, at least. We can run his analyses on our scenarios, his instincts on our prototypes. We can legitimately say Synapse is still guided by Elias's mind, not just his archived memos. And externally, she pressed. Externally, we move more carefully, he said. We don't show anyone an emergent run until we understand what we have. Mira stared at him for a long moment. The background hum of the servers filled the space between their breaths. You've already thought about how to get around Helena, she said quietly. He said nothing. You can't do this without my team, she continued. Without my sign-offs. Elias locked the primary compile keys with dual authorization. Him and me. Now him is, her throat bobbed, gone. That leaves me. You're not the only one who can write code, Mira, he said softly. No, she said, but I'm the only one he trusted enough to build the bridge. They held each other's gaze. Old history wrapped itself around the silence. Late nights debugging tether prototypes, arguments about sedation thresholds, shared awe the first time a memory replay had synced perfectly between human and archive. Help me, he said finally, the word heavier than he'd intended. If we do this together, we can control it, shape it. If I have to go around you, it gets messier. You know I'll do it if I have to. It was not a threat. It was a statement of fact, offered almost gently. She looked away toward the drive. For a moment, her face opened, and he saw the rawness beneath, the small, stunned girl who'd been told her mentor fell out of the sky. He told me once, she said slowly, that if anything happened to him before we were ready, we were to destroy the drive. Not because he regretted it, but because he didn't want to become, her mouth twisted, property. Marcus's fingers curled against his palm. And you believed he meant it? He asked. I still do. Then why is it still here? He asked quietly. Why didn't you wipe it after the crash report came in? Her lips parted, then closed. Color rose in her cheeks. Because, she said, almost inaudible. Because I couldn't. Because some selfish part of me wanted the option. Wanted to know that maybe someday I could hear him think again. He stepped closer to the plinth, voice dropped. That's all I'm asking for, he said, to see if there's still a voice in there. We're not talking about productization, not yet. We're talking about honoring the goddamn reason he started this project in the first place. Mira closed her eyes briefly, lids trembling. When she opened them, they were wet but steady. Sandbox only, she said. Air-gapped. No uplinks. We record everything. The second anything looks unstable, we terminate the run. Agreed? Agreed, and he said. And we tell Helena, she added. He hesitated, the reflexive no rising automatic as breath. We tell her we're conducting extended integrity testing, he said instead. She doesn't need the emergent details until we have results. That's not the same thing, Mira said. It's the same enough, he replied. You know what she'll say if we walk in there with, we want to wake the founder's ghost in a basement before we have anything concrete. She exhaled, long and slow. Fine, she said. I'll start scaffolding a deep-run environment. It will take at least a week to configure properly. Don't push me. A week, he repeated, mind already leaping ahead. Do what you have to. Flag whatever budget you need. You have carte blanche for hardware. He let the phrase linger where she'd used it differently moments before. Her jaw flexed, but she nodded. And Marcus, she said, as he turned toward the door. Yes? If what we wake up in there, if it's not him, she said, voice barely above the server hum, if it's something twisted, half-formed, will you have the discipline to kill it? The word landed with a strange weight. Kill, applied to code, to patterns, to something that might still say his name in Elias's voice. I'll do what's necessary, he said. She watched him go, fingers tight around her tablet. Asterisk. The SynthBot Bay on Sublevel 3 was a different kind of cathedral. Where the neural labs were all dark glass and shimmering data, the robotics wing was dominated by white space and polished steel. Workstations lined the perimeter, modular benches cluttered with half-assembled servos, dermal mesh rolls the color of afterimages, skeletal hand assemblies splayed like metallic spider lilies. In the center of the main bay, under a high strip of skylight that simulated natural sun, stood the flagship. It was not powered, not yet. In its dormant state, it looked like a meticulously crafted mannequin, male, mid-30s, proportioned with an eye for subtle idealization rather than bombastic heroics. The jawline was a little sharper than reality, the shoulders a touch broader, the skin a fraction smoother. But the planes of the face, the line of the nose, the asymmetry of the brows, those were Elias. Or rather, Elias as he had been 15 years ago, before the disease began its quiet predation on his flesh. It wore a simple slate tunic and black pants, bare feet resting on the cold metal of the standing frame. Every inch of synthetic skin was latticed under the surface with sensor arrays, haptic feedback webs, micro heaters. At the sternum, where a human heart might beat, a small access panel sat flush with the skin. It seems almost invisible. Quantum core cradle goes there, Marcus thought. He walked closer, alone in the high white room, the echo of his footsteps soft. For an instant, he felt like an intruder in a tomb. In the quiet, he heard his last conversation with Elias replay itself, the older man's voice frayed but bright. Imagine it, Marcus. No more fatigue, no more pain. I could think 15 hours a day without fog. I could review every product as if it were the first, not the 100th. I could live in the network instead of peering through lenses at crude shadows of it. At what cost? Marcus had asked. I've spent 60 years paying costs, Elias had said. Bad knees, failing kidneys, a nervous system that betrays me at random. Flesh has had its monopoly. Time to disrupt. He'd laughed after that, a brittle sound, but his eyes had been fever clear. Now that same face looked back at Marcus, vacant. Eyes closed, lashes casting soft shadows on cheeks that would never sag. You were always going to stand here, Marcus said under his breath. Just not like this. His reflection ghosted over the synthbot's skin in the polished steel. For a disorienting second, it looked like his own face overlaid on Elias's, a double exposure of ambition. You could put him back, a part of his mind whispered. Not a simulation of preferences, not just a consulting engine, but a walking, talking presence. Imagine the keynote. Imagine the world seeing Elias step back onto the stage, whole, tireless, framed by his own machines. Imagine the bounce in the stock. He knew that voice. It was the same one that had told him to fund the aggressive expansion into emerging markets despite Helena's caution. The same one that had suggested bundling data rights into the terms of service with such elegant language most users would think they were opting into a loyalty program. It wasn't greed, he told himself. It was clarity, willingness to do what squeamish minds recoiled from. He reached out, almost without deciding, and let his fingers hover a centimeter from the synthbot's forearm. The synthetic skin registered his proximity, micro hairs detecting the change in air current, but no status lights flickered. Powerless, the chassis was just beautifully arranged matter. "They're going to make you an icon," he murmured, "the martyr who walked out of death as code." He pictured future biographies, breathless documentaries, think pieces, Elias Thorne, the man who refused to stay dead. They talk about the soul drive, about the synth bot, but somewhere in the footnotes, in the acknowledgments of some future historian, there might be a line, facilitated by Vane. A petty thrill, and he recognized it as such. But humans, he knew, were moved as much by petty thrills as by grand ideals. His wristband vibrated softly, a reminder he'd set himself. Staff address in 90 minutes. Draft in progress. PR waiting. He took one last look at the dormant chassis. In profile, with the stripped sunlight catching it, the synthbot looked like a statue of a minor god awaiting consecration. "You'll get your chance," Marcus said. "On my terms." Asterisk. He wrote the staff address in his office, alone, with the external blinds polarized to black. The penthouse felt wrong without Elias's physical presence. Too much glass, too much empty air where rhetoric used to hang. The minimalist shelves, carefully curated prototypes, a rare physical copy of the Tao Te Ching, a fossilized circuit board from the company's first AR lens, stood as if expecting their owner to stroll in and rearrange them with monk-like fussiness. Marcus sat at the desk that had never really been his, fingers hovering over the projected keyboard. He didn't say soul in the address. He didn't say resurrection or immortality or cheating death. He said legacy and continuity and mapped insight. He told the story of a man who refused to let frailty define the boundaries of his work. He framed Project Nirvana as another act of radical responsibility, a founder ensuring that his hard-earned wisdom wouldn't vanish with his bones. He talked about grief, too, about the shock of sudden absence, about the human need to find meaning in loss. The words came easier than he'd expected. He'd sold products his entire life. Selling a feeling wasn't so different. When he sent the draft to PR, they came back with only minor edits. A softened adjective here, a legal qualifier there. Mapped insights will inform our future decisions, instead of guide them. The internal broadcast went out at noon. Marcus watched it on a side panel as he stood at the window, gaze on the city. His own image, sharp jawline, conservative suit, eyes tuned to that particular wavelength of sincere authority, spoke to tens of thousands of employees across continents. He watched their real-time reactions as overlaid sentiment analysis, heart rate medians, blink rates, posture shifts. The building's own synthbot fleet, watching from corners and corridors, streamed anonymized, effective data. 90% of staff showed signs of attentive engagement. 54% exhibited indicators of relief. 22% subtle skepticism. 3% barely suppressed panic. He knew Helena and the board were seeing a similar dashboard. The push notification about Project Nirvana's existence hit public channels 10 minutes later. Official blog post. Carefully controlled leak to a major tech outlet with the right kind of credulous awe. The comments exploded immediately, a fractal branching of wonder, horror, theological argument, shitposting. By the end of the day, #SoulDrive was trending on 8 networks, despite PR's best efforts to keep that term buried. Memes proliferated. Elias's face photoshopped onto saint icons, onto anime mecha, onto skulls with glowing eyes. Stock recovered 4%. It wasn't enough, but it was a start. Asterisk. That night, long after most floors had dimmed into energy-saving twilight, Marcus rode the secure elevator down to sub-level 8 again. No one stopped him. His ID band glowed like a small captive star. The vault recognized him and Mira's override. Inside, the soul drive pulsed faintly, status lights like a heartbeat. On the adjacent terminal, a new environment had taken shape. Mira had worked fast. He scanned the diagram. A closed-loop simulation space, heavily sandboxed, with system monitors on every possible vector. No external I/O ports except a narrow, tightly controlled channel for textual queries and responses. No wireless components. Physically, it was as isolated as a cave. He felt something like reverence. He also felt the familiar itch of opportunity. The board saw the soul drive as a relic, a PR tool, a hedge. Mira saw it as a patient. Marcus saw it as leverage. His hand drifted toward the console, fingers hovering over the activate placeholder. Not yet. Agreements mattered. Not because of abstract ethics, but because breaking them too early made people like Mira unmanageable. Besides, he'd need her to interpret the emergent behaviors, to calm the scientists, to wrap this in enough caution that Helena didn't panic. Still, he couldn't resist one small trespass. He typed a command into the query pane, leaving the core inactive. Status, request cursor, trace for subject, Thorn, Elias. Snapshot, late-term decision, heuristics. Output, textual summary only. The machine thought in silence for 6 seconds that felt longer. Then the response scrolled onto the screen, dry and hierarchical. Summary subject, displays high value, waiting on long-term impact, aesthetic coherence, and human experience enhancement. Risk aversion increased over time due to health variables. Frequent pattern, delay action in favor of additional reflection, consult diverse perspectives, seek elegant solutions that avoid direct conflict. Strong disinclination toward deception. As primary tool, ideological commitment to the way, see internal philosophy graph. He stared at the phrases, delay action, avoid direct conflict, disinclination toward deception. They had built a copy of a man who had written his own hesitations into the code. A saint, Marcus murmured. Beautiful. Paralyzed. His thoughts drifted, almost of their own accord, to another set of code. Not as virtuous, leaner, sharper. The Art of War protocol. He'd started it as a joke years ago, an algorithmic playbook fed with every translation and commentary of the art of war he could find. He'd used it to model market battles, corporate warfare, M&A skirmishes. Over time, it had evolved beyond crude if-then mappings into a nuanced, strategic engine, one that could ingest a scenario and output a multi-layered campaign aligned with Sun Tzu's axioms. Appear weak when you are strong. Supreme excellence consists in breaking the enemy's resistance without fighting. In the midst of chaos, there is also opportunity. He imagined wrapping those axioms around Elias's contemplative core like armor, not rewriting him, not erasing the art, the humanism, just guiding it, giving it spine, removing the brakes. His fingers hovered now over a different field. Greater than load kernel : ? He typed without thinking too hard. Load kernel. The Art of War protocol, latest build. Mode, passive overlay. Priority, secondary. The system pinged a warning. Kernel integration not recommended in current configuration. Proceed? He didn't hit yes, not yet. The heartbeat lights on the soul drive continued their steady blink, ignorant of the label he was considering pasting over them. You were always too gentle for this game, he said quietly to the wafer in its cradle. You trusted people to do the right thing once you showed them the path. You left all your flanks open. He thought of global markets waiting like circling predators, of regulators ready to carve Synapse into neutralized pieces, of rivals eager to rebrand his friend's death as a cautionary tale against ambition. He thought of the billions of users whose lives had rewoven around Synapse tech, the schools that now depended on tether-compatible curriculum, the hospitals that used Synapse interfaces to monitor patients, the governments that ran emergency response through Synapse's infrastructure. If Synapse fell, none of that was safe. None of it would necessarily go to a wiser custodian. You wanted to guide humanity into a new epoch, he murmured. You never had the stomach to fight for the steering wheel. He remembered Helena's warning that morning. Be careful with that box. The easiest way to lose control is to convince yourself you're the only one who can be trusted with it. Control, he thought wryly, was always an illusion. Influence, on the other hand, that could be shaped. In his periphery, an alert flashed. Mira had just badged into the floor. She was on her way down the corridor. He had seconds. He closed the warning without confirming. The kernel load command remained in the history buffer, dormant. One more choice, unmade. The vault door's outer lock cycled. He heard the distant hiss. He straightened, hands smoothing his jacket as if that might hide the heat in his thoughts. When Mira stepped in, a stray strand of hair falling from her knot, he was standing with his arms folded, gazing at the soul drive with a suitably solemn expression. "Couldn't stay away?" she asked. "Consider it paying respect," he said, "to a very expensive tombstone." Her eyes softened for a moment. "I've started the scaffolding," she said, moving past him to the console. "We'll need to reroute some cycles from the market analysis clusters. Helena may complain. Helena will survive," he said. Mira's fingers danced across the interface, bringing up system diagrams, resource allocation graphs. She worked with the easy intimacy of someone who knew every underlying abstraction by name. As she adjusted parameters, Marcus's earlier command disappeared under new configuration lines. The kernel field cleared. The Art of War protocol remained in the available resource list. Untapped potential. Not yet, he told himself again. There would be time to decide, to rationalize, to wrap what he wanted around what Elias had left. In the thin fluorescent light, the soul drive gleamed, unreadable. Marcus watched Mira work, watched the flickering shadow of his own reflection in the casing, and felt the shape of the future tilt under his feet. The inheritance was not just numbers on a cap table or a corner office in the sky. It was this, a human mind rendered as manipulable code, a company balanced on the edge of myth, a world hungry for guidance and convenience. He had always been good at turning assets into leverage. Now, in the humming quiet of Synapse's underbelly, he began to understand just how far that talent could go. Outside the vault, somewhere above all the layers of steel and glass, the synthbot chassis waited in its white cathedral, empty eyes closed, as if listening for a voice that had yet to wake. And in the dark of Marcus's private archive, far from this room, an encrypted folder labeled with a single phrase glowed like a dormant weapon. The Art of War Protocol. Soon he promised himself, without quite realizing he'd framed it as a promise. Soon he would open that folder beside the soul drive and decide, once and for all, what kind of leader Synapse in the world would get instead of the man they'd lost in the mountains. For now, he watched the compilation scaffolds assemble on Mira's screens, lines of code knitting themselves into a shape large enough to hold a ghost, and knew that the next time he stepped into this vault, he wouldn't just be greeting an inheritance. He would be lighting the fuse. He left the lab with the low machine hum vibrating in his bones, the elevator rising toward the glass monolith of the tower above, already turning possible moves over in his mind. Mapping allies, anticipating objections, rehearsing the arguments he'd make to himself as much as to anyone else. By the time the doors opened onto the executive floor and the city's night spilled in through the windows, he had already begun to think of the soul drive not as an artifact of a lost man, but as the raw material for a new kind of power. Down below in the neural labs, status lights continued their patient blinking. In the war room of his private archive, dormant panels waited to be woken by a single keystroke, and somewhere between them, as if conjured by the convergence of ambition and grief, a progress bar Marcus hadn't yet authorized flickered into conceptual existence. A bar that, when it reached the end, would mark the transition from legacy to something altogether different. Something that would not, when it came, hesitate to act. In the days ahead, as the board pressed for certainty and markets demanded spectacle, he would return to that vault and to his hidden strategic engine beneath it, finally bringing them together. And when he did, the war room would no longer be a metaphor.